The final meeting was held in a room designed to feel like a library in an Old English manner, a space of dark wood and leather meant to convey gravitas and timeless justice. For Liam, it felt like a tomb. He sat opposite his wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, Clara. Between them, on the polished mahogany expanse of the conference table, lay the documents that represented the formal dismemberment of their 12-year marriage. Clara was a study in triumphant composure. Her posture was perfect, her designer suit a declaration of victory. Her lawyer, a man whose smile never quite reached his eyes, radiated the smug satisfaction of a predator who had successfully cornered its prey. On Liam's side, a junior public defender, assigned to him pro bono, looked overwhelmed, shuffling papers with a nervous energy that did little to inspire confidence. So, to summarize the division of assets, Clara's lawyer, Mr. Sterling, announced, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. Misters, Thorne Mitchell will retain the primary residence, the condominium at 1400 Bellevue Avenue, along with its complete furnishings, art collection, and associated assets. He paused, letting the weight of the words settle in the silent room. Mr. Mitchell will also transfer his remaining interest in the joint savings and investment portfolios to Mrs. Thorne Mitchell, in lieu of ongoing spousal support. It was a complete rout. The condo was worth over $2 million. The art collection, curated by Clara's gallery owner mother, was another $500,000. The portfolios held their life savings, nearly $700,000 meticulously invested over a decade. Liam had built the custom shelving in the condo's library. He had selected the color palette for the living room. He had nurtured those investments with a patient, steady hand. Now it was all being swept away from him, as if he were a mere footnote in the story of their life together. Clara looked at him, a flicker of something, pity or perhaps just condescension, in her eyes. "Liam, I want to be fair," she said, her voice laced with a practiced, theatrical magnanimity. It was the same tone she used when donating last season's clothes to a charity auction. "It's not my intention to leave you with absolutely nothing." Mr. Sterling cleared his throat. "As a final item," he continued, pushing a single-page document across the table, "there is the matter of the undeveloped lot on the East Industrial Perimeter. It was purchased by your great-grandfather, I believe, Mrs. Thorne Mitchell, and has remained in the family. Its current assessed value is negligible. Given its location and zoning restrictions, it is, for all intents and purposes, unusable." Liam knew the lot, a forgotten quarter-acre of packed dirt and stubborn weeds, wedged between a defunct warehouse and a rusted railway spur. Clara's father, Marcus Thorne, a real estate developer with a portfolio of gleaming skyscrapers, referred to it as the family's dirt patch. It was a running joke at family dinners, a symbol of ancestral folly. "Clara has graciously agreed to sign her interest in the lot over to you, Liam," Mr. Sterling said, the corner of his mouth twitching. "A clean transfer. You'll be a landowner." The insult was as sharp as it was subtle. He, Liam Mitchell, the failed architect with his head full of unprofitable idealism, was being given a piece of worthless land as a parting gift, a consolation prize for 12 years of his life. Clara was taking their shared future, their home, their security. She was leaving him with dirt. Liam looked at Clara. He saw the woman he had once loved, the woman whose laughter had once filled their home. Now she was a stranger, her features hardened by a relentless pursuit of status. Her expression was one of finality, of a transaction completed. She thought she was closing a chapter. She thought she was winning. He said nothing. He simply reached out and took the deed. His fingers brushed against the crisp paper, a small, almost imperceptible gesture. Inside his worn leather briefcase, his hand rested for a moment on a thick, rolled-up cylinder of paper, a set of municipal blueprints he had legally acquired 3 months prior. Clara didn't know that for the past year, he had been consulting on a minor urban revitalization project for the city. She didn't know that during a tedious zoning review, He had seen the preliminary survey maps for the city's new crosstown transit connector. She didn't know that the linchpin of the entire multi-billion-dollar project, the single piece of land the city absolutely had to acquire for the main station hub, was a forgotten quarter-acre lot on the East Industrial Perimeter. A lot officially designated as Parcel 7B, the very lot described on the deed now in his hand. Clara believed she had taken everything of value. She was confident, secure in her assessment of him as a man without ambition, a dreamer she had carried for years. What she didn't know was that the folded paper he now held was not a symbol of his defeat. It was a lottery ticket, and he was the only one who knew the winning numbers had already been drawn. Within 60 days, the city's official offer would be delivered. An offer not for a negligible sum, but for $5,600,000. He calmly signed his name, his hands steady. He slid the document back to the lawyers. He stood up, gave a slight formal nod to Clara, and turned to walk away. The quiet click of the door closing behind him, sounding less like an ending and more like the cocking of a gun. We've all felt underestimated at some point in our lives, haven't we? That sting of being misjudged, of someone looking right through you and seeing nothing of worth. It's a universal feeling, and it's why stories like Liam's resonate so deeply with us. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Now let's get back to Liam and the quiet storm he was about to unleash. The weeks that followed the finalization of the divorce were a study in contrasts. Clara immediately threw herself into celebrating her newfound freedom, her social media feed a curated gallery of her triumphant new life. There were photos of her clinking champagne glasses with friends at rooftop bars, the city lights twinkling like a crown below her. There were videos of her directing movers as they replaced the furniture Liam had helped choose with newer, more expensive pieces that screamed impersonal luxury. She hosted a freedom fete in the condo, a lavish party where she regaled her guests with a carefully edited version of her marriage's demise. "It's just such a relief," she'd say, her voice carrying across the professionally catered affair, "to finally be untethered from someone with no real ambition. You know, I love Liam, in a way, but his dreams were always so small. Little community projects, pro bono work. It's noble, I suppose, but it doesn't pay the mortgage on a place like this." Her friends, a flock of equally status-conscious individuals, would nod in sympathy, their eyes scanning the expensive art on the walls, silently affirming that she had indeed made the right choice. Her father, Marcus Thorne, was a frequent presence, his booming voice echoing his approval. "My daughter is a thoroughbred," he announced to a group of business associates at the party, a possessive hand on Clara's shoulder. "You can't yoke a thoroughbred to a plow horse and expect it to be happy." She needed to run. In one particularly cruel moment, captured on a friend's Instagram story, someone asked what Liam had received in the settlement. Clara laughed, a light, dismissive sound. "Oh, I made sure he was taken care of," she said, sipping her wine. "I gave him a lovely piece of real estate, very rustic." The group around her chuckled, understanding the unspoken punchline. They were laughing at the man they saw as a failure, the man who had been left with nothing but a patch of dirt. Meanwhile, Liam moved into a small, sparsely furnished one-bedroom apartment across town. The walls were a sterile white, the furniture functional and anonymous. The silence was the most jarring part. After 12 years in a home filled with the hum of a shared life, the quiet of his new reality was deafening. He would stand at the window, looking out at the brick wall of the adjacent building, a stark contrast to the panoramic city views from the condo he no longer called home. But this was not a place of defeat. It was a command center. On the second night in his new apartment, after a simple dinner of toast and eggs, he cleared the small dining table. He carefully unrolled the thick cylinder of paper he had kept in his briefcase. Under the warm glow of a single overhead light, the intricate lines and notations of the City Transit Authority's master plan spread across the table. It was a beautiful document, a symphony of engineering and urban planning. And right in the center, marked with a bold red-bordered square, was parcel 7B. His memory of the moment he discovered it was crystal clear. It had been a sweltering afternoon in late July, months before Clara had even mentioned the word divorce. He was at the city planning department, a place he knew well from his years of navigating permits for his smaller, community-focused architectural projects. He was there to review the water main schematics for a small park renovation he was designing. The clerk, a harried man named George, whom Liam had befriended over years of patient inquiries, was juggling 3 phone calls at once. "Just a second, Liam," he'd mumbled, pointing to a side room. "The archives are in there. Section C, Urban Infrastructure. Just don't make a mess." Inside the dusty, climate-controlled room, surrounded by shelves groaning under the weight of municipal history, Liam found the park schematics. But next to them, left out on a large viewing table, was another set of blueprints, far grander in scope. The title block read, "Crosstown Connector Project, Phase 1, Preliminary Survey." His architect's curiosity was piqued. He knew the project was in the works. It was the city's most ambitious undertaking in half a century. He gently unrolled the plans. His eyes traced the proposed path of the new underground line, the placement of ventilation shafts, the massive footprint of the planned central station. His breath caught. The station, a sprawling subterranean complex, was centered precisely on a parcel of land he recognized. He had heard his father-in-law, Marcus, joke about it for years. The Thorn Folly, he called it, the worthless dirt patch, parcel 7B. A cold, electric certainty had washed over him. He knew Marcus, with his focus on prime downtown real estate, paid no attention to the industrial outskirts. He knew Clara considered the lot a literal and figurative stain on the family's portfolio. They were blind to it. In that moment, looking at the blueprint, Liam didn't see revenge. He saw leverage. He saw a way out. He had spent the next 2 months quietly gathering every piece of public domain information he could on the project, confirming its trajectory, its budget, and its immovable reliance on that specific piece of land. When Clara had finally sat him down and announced she wanted a divorce, he hadn't felt shock or despair. He had felt ready. Now, in his quiet apartment, he looked at the plans again. He wasn't just a landowner, he was the sole proprietor of the Keystone. And soon, very soon, the builders would come asking for it. The first official letter arrived a week later. It was from the City Acquisitions Department, printed on heavy, watermarked bond paper that felt significant even before it was opened. The language was formal, filled with bureaucratic jargon, but the core message was simple. The city of Northgate expressed its official intent to acquire parcel 7B for purposes of public development, as authorized by Municipal Code 4.1a. They invited him to a preliminary meeting to discuss a fair market valuation and a voluntary sale agreement. Liam read the letter twice, then folded it neatly and placed it on the table next to the deed. The first move had been made. Now, the game would begin. He picked up his phone, not to call a lawyer, but to schedule a meeting with a name he'd been given by a trusted old professor from architecture school, Eleanor Vance. She wasn't a litigator, she was a financial strategist, known for her discretion and her unorthodox, holistic approach to wealth management. His professor had described her as someone who builds financial fortresses, not just bank accounts. Liam knew he wasn't just coming into money. He was about to enter a new world, and he would need a guide. Their first meeting took place in her office, a calm, minimalist space that felt more like a modern art gallery than a financial firm. Eleanor Vance was a woman in her late 40s, with a quiet intensity and eyes that seemed to assess everything with a serene, analytical clarity. She listened without interruption as Liam laid out the entire story, the marriage, the condescension from Clara and her family, the discovery of the transit plan, the divorce settlement. He left nothing out, including the humiliation. When he finished, she was silent for a long moment, her fingers steepled before her. "They mistook your patience for passivity," she said finally. "It wasn't a question, it was a diagnosis. Arrogant people often do. They can't comprehend a strategy that involves waiting." "I'm not interested in revenge, Ms. Vance," Liam said, his voice steady. "I want to build something, a new life, a new firm, based on the principles I believe in. The principles my ex-wife's family found so contemptible." "Good," Eleanor replied, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "Revenge is a poor investment. It offers a fleeting return and carries a high emotional overhead. Legacy, on the other hand, legacy is where the real value lies." Together they began to prepare. Eleanor's team performed a deep dive analysis, commissioning 3 independent commercial real estate appraisals based on the city's imminent domain purchase. They researched precedent cases, established a valuation floor and ceiling, and prepared a negotiation strategy. Liam, for his part, focused on the architecture of his future. He began sketching out a business plan for a new firm, Mitchell Design Collaborative. It would specialize in sustainable, human-centric urban projects. The very work Marcus Thorne had once called a charity hobby. While Liam was quietly laying the foundations of his new empire, Clara was busy enjoying the spoils of her old one. Her days were a whirlwind of boutique shopping, spa appointments, and long lunches. She was redecorating the condo for the 3rd time in as many months, complaining to her friends that the energy left over from Liam was proving difficult to cleanse. "It's the lingering scent of contentment," her friend Genevieve, a self-proclaimed energy healer, had diagnosed. "He was content with mediocrity. That's a very sticky, dense energy." Clara had nodded sagely, making a mental note to buy a more expensive brand of sage to burn. Her confidence was absolute, a high-walled fortress. She had won. She had the home, the money, the status, the freedom. Liam was a ghost, a memory that was already starting to fade, relegated to a past she was actively and expensively erasing. The call from the city for Liam's first negotiation meeting came on a Tuesday. He wore a simple, well-tailored navy suit, not expensive but immaculate. He walked into the municipal building, not as a man who had been left with nothing, but as a man who held the single most important key to the city's flagship project. The city's representatives, a trio of stern-faced bureaucrats, started with an anchor offer of $800,000. They presented it as a generous, above-market price for a piece of industrial wasteland. Liam didn't flinch. He didn't counter. He simply listened, nodded politely, and then slid a slim portfolio across the table. It contained the 3 independent appraisals Eleanor's team had prepared. The lowest of them was for $4.9 million. The highest was for $6.2 million. "I believe you'll find," Liam said, his voice calm and even, "that fair market value is a more complex figure when the land in question is not merely adjacent to a major project, but is, in fact, the project's linchpin. My number is $5.6 million. That's non-negotiable." The lead bureaucrat sputtered, his face turning a shade of plum. "Mr. Mitchell, that's an outrageous figure. We can take this to court. Eminent domain." "You can," Liam agreed, his composure unshakable. "And your lawyers will fight my lawyers for 12 to 18 months. Construction will be delayed. Your project will be a year behind schedule before the first shovel ever breaks ground, costing the taxpayers millions in overrun penalties. Or you can approve the sale at a price that my team has thoroughly documented and justified, and your project can proceed on time. The choice is yours." He stood up, leaving the portfolio on the table. "I'll await your decision." He walked out of the room, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. The plow horse had just shown the teeth of a wolf. The tension of the next 2 weeks was a quiet, thrumming thing beneath the surface of Liam's calm exterior. The city had gone silent. It was a waiting game, a battle of nerves. He knew his position was strong, But the wheels of bureaucracy were unpredictable. A sudden political shift, a budget reallocation, any number of things could derail the entire process. He spent his days at the public library, sketching designs for his future firm's first hypothetical projects, losing himself in the clean lines and elegant solutions of his craft. It was his form of meditation, a way to channel his anxiety into creation. It was during this limbo that Clara summoned him. A single, imperious text message appeared on his phone. "I need you to come to the condo, 2 p.m. tomorrow, final tax forms to sign." No please, no how are you, just a command. He considered refusing, telling her to mail the documents, but a deeper, quieter instinct told him to go. He needed to see it one last time. He needed to close the door on that part of his life himself, on his own terms. When he arrived, the doorman, a kind man named Hector who had always been friendly to him, gave him a look of deep sympathy. "Good to see you, Mr. Mitchell," he said softly, as if offering a condolence. The elevator ride up to the penthouse felt like an ascent into a past life. Clara opened the door, her expression impatient. "You're late," she said, though he was precisely on time. The condo was different, colder. The warm, textured furniture they had picked out together was gone, replaced by stark, minimalist pieces in chrome and white leather that looked like they belonged in a hotel lobby. The air smelled of some cloying, expensive floral spray. She led him to the kitchen island, a slab of imported marble where they had once shared countless breakfasts. A single document and a pen were laid out on its surface. "Just sign here," she said, pointing a manicured finger at the signature line. As he reached for the pen, she looked him over, her gaze critical, taking in his simple button-down shirt and worn jeans. "I hope you're managing," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "In wherever it is you're living now." She didn't wait for an answer. "You know, you could probably sell that little dirt patch I gave you for a few $1,000s. Might buy you a decent suit. You need one." It was the final twist of the knife, delivered with the casual cruelty of someone who believes they are utterly untouchable. She saw him as a charity case, a pathetic creature to be pitied and scorned. Liam looked at her. He saw the expensive suit, the perfectly coiffed hair, the glittering diamond earrings, and for the first time, he felt nothing but a profound and weary pity for her. She was trapped in a prison of her own making, a beautiful, gilded cage where a person's worth was measured only by the things they owned. He said nothing. He simply signed the document, his signature a clean, decisive stroke. He pushed the paper back toward her, his eyes meeting hers for a brief, final moment. He didn't offer a defense. He didn't hint at what was coming. His silence was his answer. He turned and walked out of the condo, out of her life, leaving her standing alone in the cold, beautiful, empty space she had fought so hard to win. As he walked out of the building, his phone vibrated. It was a message from Eleanor Vance. They blinked. The city council held an emergency session this afternoon. They've approved the sale. $5.6 million. The funds will be transferred within 48 hours. Congratulations, Liam. The foundation is laid. Liam stopped on the sidewalk, the bustling city noise fading into a background hum. He looked up at the sky, a sliver of blue between the tall buildings. He didn't feel a surge of vengeful triumph. He felt a quiet, expansive sense of peace. The storm had passed. The ground was clear. It was time to build. The news broke publicly 2 days later. It wasn't a headline on the front page, but a significant item in the business section of the Northgate Chronicle. City finalizes key land acquisition for Crosstown Connector. The article detailed the city's purchase of a strategically vital parcel of land in the East Industrial Perimeter, essential for the construction of the new Central Transit Hub. It mentioned the final purchase price, $5.6 million, and the name of the seller, a private entity listed as L. Mitchell Holdings, LLC. Clara was at a Sunday brunch with her father at the Oak Room, the most exclusive restaurant in the city. It was their weekly ritual, A time for Marcus to hold court and for Clara to bask in the reflected glory of his power. They were seated at their usual table, a prime spot by the large bay window overlooking the park. Marcus was pontificating about a rival developer's recent failure. He over-leveraged, Marcus declared, slicing into his steak with surgical precision. No vision. You have to see the board, Clara, not just the next move, but the whole game. It was then that a business acquaintance, a man named Henderson, stopped by their table. Marcus, Clara, he said with a nod, did you see the news about the transit hub? The city finally paid up for that last piece of land, 5.5 million, give or take. Can you imagine? For a patch of industrial scrubland. Clara smiled politely, uninterested. It was just more business talk. But Marcus, ever the predator, smelled money. Which parcel was it? He asked, his interest piqued. Don't know the number, Henderson said, shrugging. Some spot out by the old rail spur. I heard the seller made out like a bandit. A private LLC. Smart move, whoever they are. He clapped Marcus on the shoulder and moved on. Marcus fell silent, a thoughtful frown creasing his brow. The old rail spur, the East Industrial Perimeter, a vague, unsettling memory began to surface. He pulled out his phone, his thumbs moving swiftly across the screen, pulling up the city's business journal report. He scanned the article, his eyes narrowing. Parcel 7B, he murmured, almost to himself. The name was familiar. He scrolled further, his movements becoming more frantic. He pulled up the municipal property database, a tool he used a dozen times a day. He typed in the parcel number, the result loaded on the screen, the location, the acreage, and the history of ownership, transferred from Thorne Family Trust to Clara Thorne Mitchell. And then, 2 months ago, a quit-claim deed transferring sole ownership to Liam Mitchell. Marcus's face went slack. The color drained from it, leaving behind a pallid, waxy sheen. The fork in his hand clattered onto his plate, the sound unnaturally loud in the genteel hum of the restaurant. Dad, what is it? Clara asked, annoyed at the interruption. You look like you've seen a ghost. Marcus slowly lifted his head, his eyes wide with a dawning, catastrophic horror. He looked at his daughter, the brilliant, thoroughbred daughter he had praised just moments before. Clara, he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. The lot. The worthless dirt patch you gave him. He held out the phone, his hand trembling slightly. That's the lot. Clara snatched the phone, her brow furrowed in confusion. She read the screen. She saw the parcel number. She saw the name. She saw the purchase price. $5.6 million. The words didn't compute at first. They were just numbers, just text on a screen. Then the reality crashed into her, a physical blow that knocked the air from her lungs. The condo, the art, the savings, the grand prize she had secured, all of it together was worth less than half of the worthless thing she had discarded with a laugh. The carefully constructed facade of her victory crumbled into dust. She wasn't the winner, she was the fool. The punchline to a joke so immense, so profound, that it defied comprehension. The entire restaurant, with its quiet wealth and knowing glances, seemed to be staring at her, laughing at her. She had been so busy polishing her trophy that she hadn't realized it was made of tin, while the real prize, the one she'd thrown in the trash, was solid gold. Her hand flew to her mouth, a strangled gasp escaping her lips. The world she had so carefully built had just been leveled by a quiet man with a patient plan. Clara's first reaction was a tidal wave of pure, undiluted fury. The shock curdled into rage. In the car on the way home from the disastrous brunch, she fumbled for her phone, her fingers shaking with adrenaline. Marcus sat beside her, silent and grim, the implications of this public humiliation already calculating themselves in his developer's brain. She found Liam's number and stabbed at the screen. He answered on the third ring, his voice as infuriatingly calm as ever. Hello? You, she shrieked, the sound raw and ugly. You knew! You knew all along! You tricked me! You stole from me! There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Liam spoke, his voice was devoid of anger or triumph. It was the voice of a man stating a simple, irrefutable fact. I didn't trick you, Clara. The information was a matter of public record. You just never thought to look. You assigned it no value, so you didn't investigate its potential. You did the same thing with me. The simple truth of his words was more infuriating than any insult. That was family land. It was my money. You owe me that money, she screamed, her voice cracking. The settlement was signed and finalized by your own lawyer, Clara, he replied, his tone still maddeningly level. A lawyer you and your father selected for his killer instinct. The deed is in my name. The company is mine. The money is mine. It's all perfectly legal. Marcus, who had been listening on speakerphone, finally spoke, his voice a low growl. We're going to sue you into oblivion, Mitchell. We'll tie you up in court for the next decade. You could try, Liam said, but your case would be frivolous, and the discovery process would be revealing. All of your firm's financials, Clara's spending habits, the pre-divorce planning, it would all become public record. Is that a fight you really want to have, Marcus? Is that a story you want the Chronicle to print? Silence. Liam had just checkmated him. Marcus Thorne's empire was built on a carefully crafted image of invincibility and shrewdness. A protracted, messy public lawsuit detailing how he and his daughter had been so thoroughly outmaneuvered by the man they dismissed as a failure would be devastating to that image. It would make him look weak. In his world, weakness was a death sentence. What do you want, Liam? Clara asked, her voice dropping from a shriek to a desperate, venomous whisper. I want to close this chapter, he said. I will meet with you both. One time. You can say whatever you feel you need to say, and then we are done. He named a time and a place, 2 days from now, at an address she didn't recognize. Then you will not contact me again. He hung up before she could reply. The address Liam had given them was in a recently renovated industrial district, a part of town Marcus had always ignored. They arrived to find a converted warehouse, its old brick facade now punctuated by massive panes of glass. The directory in the lobby listed the third floor as the Mitchell Design Collaborative. The name itself was another quiet assertion of his victory. They stepped out of the elevator into a vast, open-concept studio. The space was flooded with natural light. The floors were polished concrete, the walls adorned not with expensive, ostentatious art, but with architectural renderings and models of elegant, eco-conscious buildings. It was the physical manifestation of all the idealistic dreams Marcus and Clara had once mocked. And it was spectacular. Liam was standing by a large conference table, looking out the window. He was not alone. Beside him stood Eleanor Vance, her calm, intelligent presence an immediate and unexpected challenge to their expected dynamic. She was a clear signal that Liam was no longer playing on his own. Thank you for coming, Liam said, turning to face them. He gestured to the chairs opposite him. Clara and Marcus sat, their bodies stiff with resentment. This was not the pathetic rented room they had imagined. This was a place of power, and they were the ones who had been summoned. I'm not here to gloat, Liam began, his voice measured and low. I'm here for the truth. Because you've been living in a fiction for a very long time. He looked directly at Clara. You told your friends you left me because I lacked ambition. The truth is you feared my ambition because it wasn't the same as yours. You wanted me to join your father's firm, to design another glass and steel monument to wealth. I wanted to build community centers and sustainable housing. You called that small. You called it a hobby. He then turned his gaze to Marcus. You once told me, at our own dinner table, that my design philosophy was unprofitable idealism. You said I didn't understand how the world works. But you, The great developer, the man who sees the whole board. You couldn't see the value in a piece of land your own family had owned for 100 years. You were so blinded by your definition of success that you missed the biggest opportunity sitting in your own portfolio. He leaned forward slightly, his hands resting on the table. This was the moment of the moral mirror, the point where he would force them to look at the reflection they had so long avoided. This was never about the money, he said, his voice dropping, becoming quieter but more intense. It's about value. You devalued my work. You devalued my principles. You devalued me. And in the end, you devalued a piece of land because you couldn't be bothered to see its potential. The lot wasn't worthless, Clara. It just required vision and patience. The same qualities you told me were my greatest weaknesses. Clara stared at him, her face a mask of disbelief and wounded pride. For the first time, she was hearing a truth she couldn't deflect with a cutting remark or dismiss with a wave of her hand. Marcus, recovering his composure, shifted into his default mode, negotiation. All right, Liam, you've made your point. You're a clever boy, we underestimated you. So what's the price? You've got your seed money now. Let's talk about a partnership. My firm, your new design sense. We could do great things. We'll cut you in, a 20% stake in a new subsidiary. It was a classic Marcus Thorne move. Absorb the threat, co-opt the victory, and turn it into another asset. Liam slowly shook his head, a faint, sad smile on his face. You still don't get it, do you, Marcus? He said. He gestured around the sunlit studio, at the plans for parks and libraries and affordable homes. My new firm is built on a different foundation. It's a foundation you would never understand. It's not for sale. He stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. I have everything I need for my marriage to Clara, he said, his voice clear and final. I have the seed capital for my life's work. And I have my freedom. Thank you for that. He turned and walked back to the window, leaving them sitting at the table in the beautiful, quiet, and powerful space he had built from the ashes of the life they had tried to burn down. The meeting was over. The chapter was closed. The fallout was immediate and brutal, though not in the way a lawsuit or a public fight would have been. It was a quieter, more insidious unraveling. The story of Liam's triumph spread like wildfire through the city's elite circles, the same circles Clara and Marcus dominated. But the narrative was not what they would have wished. Liam wasn't cast as a villain or a trickster. He was seen as a brilliant strategist, a quiet underdog who had patiently weathered the storm and emerged victorious. Clara, conversely, was no longer the empowered woman who had shed her deadweight husband. She was the fool, the woman who had literally thrown away a fortune out of sheer arrogance. At cocktail parties and charity galas, the whispers followed her. Can you believe it? She gave it to him. Marcus must be livid. How did he miss that? His own family's property. The humiliation was 1,000 tiny cuts. Her friends, who had once praised her for her decisiveness, now looked at her with a mixture of pity and schadenfreude. Her status, once unassailable, was now tainted by the one thing her world could not forgive, being outsmarted. Marcus Thorne's reputation also took a significant hit. In the cutthroat world of high-stakes development, foresight is currency. His failure to see the value in the transit hub land was seen as a massive, inexplicable blind spot. Rivals who had once feared him now saw a chink in his armor. A few columnists in the financial papers wrote thinly veiled articles about aging titans losing their touch, using the Parcel 7B sale as a prime example. The myth of Marcus Thorne, the infallible visionary, was tarnished. Clara's lifestyle, once a symbol of her victory, became a source of immense pressure. The maintenance fees, property taxes, and staff costs for the Bellevue Avenue condo were astronomical. With her liquid assets from the divorce now looking paltry in comparison to Liam's windfall, the burden fell entirely on Marcus to maintain her. But Marcus was incensed. He saw her not as his victimized daughter, but as the public face of his greatest professional embarrassment. Their relationship, always transactional, became openly hostile. "Do you have any idea how this makes me look?" he'd roared at her in his office one afternoon. "You, living it up in that palace, while the whole city is laughing at us? You're a walking, talking billboard for my failure." He cut her allowance by 2/3. "You want to be an independent woman?" he sneered. "Fine, be independent." The walls of Clara's gilded cage began to close in. The champagne parties stopped. The endless shopping sprees ceased. She started receiving past due notices from the Condo Association. Her friends, sensing the shift in her financial climate, became distant, their calls less frequent. The magnificent condo, once her fortress of solitude and triumph, now felt like a mausoleum, its vast, empty rooms echoing her isolation. Desperate, she met with Mr. Sterling, her killer lawyer. She wanted to sue Liam, to break the settlement, to claim some portion of the $5.6 million she now saw as rightfully hers. Sterling listened patiently, then laid out the cold, hard reality. "Clara, the agreement is ironclad," he said, his expression grim. "You voluntarily signed over the deed. In fact, you insisted on it being framed as a generous act on your part. You had it appraised. The appraisal at the time, given the available information, listed its value as negligible. There was no fraud. There was no deception. There was only foresight on his part and a lack of it on ours. The unspoken ours was a courtesy. They both knew the failure was hers and her father's. If we file a suit, we will lose. And worse, you will be deposed. You will have to answer, under oath, why you considered the land worthless. You will have to relive your misjudgment in a public court. It would be a catastrophe." The last door had closed. There was no legal recourse. There was no financial bailout coming from her father. There was only the crushing weight of her new reality. She was alone, adrift in a life she could no longer afford, haunted by the ghost of a fortune she had given away. The victory she had celebrated so loudly had been a mirage, and the desert ahead was looking vast and unforgiving. The months that followed were a period of profound transformation for both Liam and Clara, moving in opposite directions. Liam's vision, once just sketches in a notebook, began to take concrete form. The Mitchell Design Collaborative was no longer a hypothetical entity. It was a thriving business. He used a portion of the funds to hire a small, brilliant team of young architects and engineers who shared his passion for sustainable, community-oriented design. His reputation, bolstered by the now legendary story of the land deal, attracted clients who were drawn not just to his talent, but to his integrity. His first major project was a statement of intent. He partnered with a nonprofit to design a state-of-the-art community center and public library in a low-income neighborhood not far from the new transit hub his former land would anchor. He did the entire design phase pro bono. The project garnered significant positive press, further cementing his image as a new kind of developer, one driven by purpose, not just profit. His work was celebrated for its elegance, its functionality, and its conscience. The very idealism that Marcus and Clara had mocked was now the cornerstone of his success. His personal life also flourished. His professional relationship with Eleanor Vance had slowly, naturally, blossomed into something deeper. It was a partnership built on a foundation of mutual respect, shared intellect, and quiet understanding. With Eleanor, there were no games, no posturing. They would spend evenings in his now beautifully but simply furnished apartment, not talking about stock prices or social climbing, but about books, art, and the kind of world they wanted to help build. It was a quiet, profound happiness he had never known with Clara. For Clara, the journey was one of descent. The inevitable finally happened. She had to sell the condo. The symbol of her supposed triumph was put on the market. The sale itself was another humiliation. Due to a cooling market and her desperation for a quick sale, It sold for slightly less than what she and Liam had paid for it years ago. After paying off the closing costs and the debts she had accrued, she was left with a respectable, but, for her, deeply humbling sum of money. She moved into a modest two-bedroom apartment in a decent but unremarkable neighborhood. The doorman was gone. The panoramic views were replaced by a view of another apartment building. The silence in her new home was not peaceful. It was heavy with the weight of all she had lost. Stripped of her status, her wealth, and her social circle, she was forced to confront the person she was beneath it all. And she didn't like what she saw. For the first time in her life, she had to get a job. Not a vanity position on a charity board, but a real 9-to-5 job. Through a distant family connection who still felt some pity for her, she found a position as an administrative assistant at an art gallery. The pay was meager, and the work was often tedious. She, Clara Thorne, who had once looked down on the entire world from her penthouse, was now fetching coffee and managing calendars. One evening, sitting alone in her small apartment, she found an old photo album from the early years of her marriage. There was a picture of her and Liam, young and smiling, on a hiking trip. He was looking at her with such open, uncomplicated love. She remembered that man, the kind, patient, brilliant man who had been fascinated by the structure of a leaf, who could spend hours sketching a park bench just to get the ergonomics right. The man she had slowly crushed under the weight of her own ambitions and insecurities. With trembling fingers, she wrote an email to Liam. It took her hours. She deleted draft after draft. There were no demands, no accusations. It was short, stilted, and stripped of all her usual artifice. Liam, it read, I was wrong. About everything. About the land, but mostly about you. I'm sorry for the person I was. I hope you are happy. You deserve it. Clara. She hit send before she could lose her nerve. It wasn't a plea for reconciliation or forgiveness. It was a confession. A quiet, painful acknowledgement of the truth she had finally been forced to see. Liam read the email the next morning. He felt no surge of victory, no satisfaction. He simply felt a quiet sense of closure. He wrote back a single sentence. Thank you, Clara. I wish you peace. He had already moved on. The apology was not for him, it was for her. It was the first step on her own, long road to building a life of actual value. 2 years passed. The city of Northgate was changing. The Crosstown Connector project was well underway, a massive artery of steel and concrete being threaded beneath the city. And rising near its new central hub was another, more modest but no less significant structure, the Eastgate Community Library, designed by the Mitchell Design Collaborative. Liam stood on the bustling construction site, a hard hat on his head, a set of blueprints in his hand. The building was nearly complete, its innovative design, with a living green roof and soaring, light-filled spaces, already winning architectural awards. He was no longer just an architect. He was a force for positive change in the city. His firm was a resounding success, known for its integrity and its groundbreaking work. He and Eleanor were married now, their partnership a quiet testament to a love built on shared values and mutual admiration. They were expecting their first child. His life was full, not with the trappings of wealth, but with the deep, resonant satisfaction of meaningful work and genuine love. One afternoon, while walking near his old neighborhood, he saw a familiar figure. It was Clara. She was coming out of a small, independent art gallery, laughing with a coworker. She looked different. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by a simple, stylish dress. Her hair was less severe, her makeup more natural. The brittle, defensive shell she had worn for years seemed to have fallen away, revealing someone softer, more approachable. Their eyes met across the street. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. There was no animosity in her gaze, no lingering resentment. She gave him a small, genuine smile, a real one that reached her eyes, and a slight nod. It was a nod of acknowledgement, of peace. Liam smiled and nodded back. Then the light changed, the flow of traffic resumed, and they both continued on their separate paths. She hadn't found fabulous wealth or reclaimed her old status. Instead, she had found something more valuable, a sense of self not dependent on the approval of others. She was living a smaller life, yes, but it was her own. She was no longer a thoroughbred defined by her pedigree, but simply a woman walking her own path. It wasn't the spectacular downfall her old circle might have wished upon her, but a quiet, difficult, and ultimately more meaningful redemption. As Liam walked away, he reflected on the incredible journey, the pain of his divorce, the public humiliation, the quiet victory. It had all led him here. He had learned that true strength isn't about dominance or control. It's about patience, resilience, and an unwavering belief in one's own worth, even when the world tells you that you have none. The $5.6 million had not been the prize. It had been the key, the tool that allowed him to build a life that aligned with his soul. The real victory wasn't in the money he had gained, but in the man he had become. The world is full of people who will try to define you, to put you in a box, to assess your value based on their own limited criteria. But true worth is not something that can be given or taken away by others. It is something you build within yourself, quietly, patiently, day by day. Liam's story is a powerful reminder that sometimes the most valuable assets we possess are the ones that no one else can see. What do you think is the most important part of true success? Is it wealth, status, or something else entirely? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of quiet strength and ultimate vindication. Thanks for watching.